No question that that crime bill contributed to America's mass incarceration problem.
So why did you run?
The federal government would pay states to incarcerate more people. 25 years after the 1994 crime bill was enacted, we are still having conversations about the import and significance of the bill.
That 1994 crime bill, it did contribute to mass incarceration in our country.
It's important that people remember the context of the political environment in the early 1990s.
The other big piece of legislation on Capitol Hill tonight is the crime bill.
Now, violent crime peaked in 1991, and the drafters of the bill didn't know that in 1993 and 1994 when they were drafting and signing it. Urban areas, urban cities across the country were ravaged by crack cocaine, and Americans were afraid of crime. The 1994 crime bill.
Okay, I'm glad she's bringing this information up. But are you bringing this information up to try to diminish how much the crime bill has done to the black community? Is that what you're doing? I get it. People were scared of crime, and there was a big boom in 1993 or 93, 94. But yeah, the 90s was bad, but the 80s was bad too. The 80s was really bad. So how did they not know what was about to happen? Because they have all the brightest people in the world working for them. So they had to know something. They had to know exactly what was going to happen. And they was going to go grabbing every single person who was even close to the crime that didn't even do it.
Bill was signed by President Bill Clinton. This was a pretty significant bill at the time, and President Clinton and Senator Biden at the time were right that the bill was significant.
The most significant federal effort to deal with violent crime in America that has ever been undertaken.
It was important for a Democrat at the time to be seen as taking a significant role in trying to reduce crime and violence in the United States. And at the time, the Congressional Black Caucus was part of the debate around the crime bill. And the Congressional Black Caucus didn't want every provision that was included in this bill. It became clear that the provisions in the 94 crime bill were going to be a political compromise. And so the history is much more complicated than is sometimes portrayed by the media. Now, what did the bill do?
That's all the time. And I mean, what she said is true, that sometimes history does add some context, that's some necessary context to whatever we're discussing, debating, and whatnot. So that context does add something to it. But it's still a piece of crap bill.
Than is sometimes portrayed by the media. Now, what did the bill do? Just like a lot of political compromises, there was the good and there was the bad. For example, the bill eliminated 19 types of semi-automatic assault weapons. It also provided huge amounts of funding to hire cops. 100,000 cops were funded. It was about $14 million at the time for community policing. The bill also enacted the Violence Against Women Act that provided funding to protect women and victims of domestic violence.
Why was crime so profitable? And I'm not saying that to be facetious, to be crazy, nothing like that. I'm just asking because it just seemed like they a whole lot of money was opened up. A lot of people was getting a lot of money back then. A lot of jobs was opening up. You know what I mean? It just so happened that like during this this crime bill and everyone's being arrested, mass incarceration. Like, why did it seem like they was getting an onslaught of cash at this point?
Provided funding to protect women and victims of domestic violence and crimes against women. But the most pernicious provision of the 1994 crime bill was its $12 billion that was authorized for states across the country that would enact what's called truth in sentencing laws. That funding literally paid states to increase the number of prison beds that they allocated for individuals convicted of violent crime in this country.
So that made it profitable to these states. That made it profitable. In my opinion, that made it profitable.
That they allocated for individuals convicted of violent crime in this country to serve 85% of their sentences behind bars. The reason that provision is so important, and the reason we're still talking about it today, is the federal government essentially subsidized states across the country to build more prisons. So 25 years later, the crime bill is being debated.
You stood up and used that tough on crime, phony rhetoric. That bill was a huge mistake.
There's no question that that crime bill contributed to America's mass incarceration problem.
So why did you run? Huh? Why did you run? Oh yeah. I mean, why did you decide to be his running mate? I hear that she was prosecuting a lot of those people who was coming through the jail systems. She was, oh my gosh, everybody was eating during that time. Everybody was eating. It was a lot of people their pockets was getting so fat. The same way that they say whenever the rich get richer, the poor gets poorer. Or whenever crime goes up, it seemed like somebody's pocket is getting fatter. And back then it was the states that was, they was given incentives to build bigger prisons and then fill up them prisons, and the occupancy had to be at least 85% of their time. So if it's 5 years, they got to spend at least 3.5 years. And as long as they spend 3.5 years of their time, the prison will get that money from the government saying job well done. Whether they committed the crime or if the crime was a minor crime, something that was actually a slap on the wrist. Now we're wondering why a whole lot of people aren't being released and locked up now and whatnot. This whole thing is a whole poop show, man.
1994 crime bill, we had a gigantic epidemic in America of violence, particularly in African-American communities. The notion was overwhelmingly supported. It was supported by the Black Caucus in the United States Senate by and large.
And the reason that the crime bill comes up so often is, today in 2019, it is hard for so many people to understand why the federal government would pay states to incarcerate more people, given the devastating consequences we know that incarceration causes.
You heard her say that. Pay states to incarcerate more people. Why would the government pay states to incarcerate more people? That's exactly what she said. She's the one doing this documentary, and she's on the left, and she's doing this to give us a bit of perspective to support Biden. She's not trying to go against him. Yeah, she's giving both sides of the coin on this video, and I commend her for that. But she literally said the federal government paid states upwards of $12 billion to incarcerate people. You have an incentive now to incarcerate people. Build them jails, fill them up. We keep on sending the money. Build them jails, fill them up. We'll keep on sending the money. So basically, lock them up. Don't do too much to the community to fix things at all. Nah, don't do anything to fix them up. You can give them some new windows and new little rails and probably cut the grass, but anything to stop the crime, nah. To get them young and start teaching them a trade, nah, none of that. Let's just make sure that that money keep on coming in, that sweet money.
But at the time, policymakers felt the need to respond to what they felt was uncontrolled violence, and this bill was the way that policymakers, that Congress could say, we're do something about it.
Violent crime and the fear it provokes are crippling our society. The crime bill before Congress gives you a chance to do something about it, a chance to be tough and smart.
We need to examine the crime bill and all of the federal bills that galvanized prison spending, that galvanized more arrest, more incarceration, and we need to look to the future. And today, The United States leads the world in terms of incarceration. In fact, if each state were its own country, 23 states would have the highest incarceration rate in the world. Any candidate running for election who's serious about criminal justice reform,
That's crazy, man. More than 2.3 million people are incarcerated in the United States. If each state were its own country.
candidate running for election who's serious about criminal justice reform, who's serious.
That is crazy. She said if each state was its own country, we would have the most people incarcerated in the world.
About cutting the prison population by 50%. Needs to take a hard look at what has worked and hasn't worked in terms of our past criminal justice policies. And
this dude stole Pampers. He stole some Pampers and got arrested for 1 year. This other guy was protesting and he got 1 year. Hold on. Mass incarceration sessions, mandatory sentencing. This is crazy, man.
Hasn't worked in terms of our past criminal justice policies, and understand that federal funding to increase the number of beds in prisons across the country is simply not a way to create safer and healthier communities.
Hey, NBC.
Hey, man, listen. Daggone ears. Oh, man. I don't like learning this new stuff about stuff that I was trying to ignore all my daggone life. Trying to ignore it for a reason so I wouldn't have any responsibility. Now, when you hear something, you got a responsibility. That's the trick. Because if you don't do anything, then now you're a-hole. But I want to hear what y'all got to say about this in the comments below. And if you have yet to hit that subscribe button, please make sure you do so on your way out the door. Once again, guys, I'm Van, and now we are all the LFR family, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video. Hopefully inside the Patreon as well. You all have been amazing, man, per usual. Love y'all.